This video is derived from a free-flowing and wide-ranging conversation that was recorded on April 18, 2021 between the Hon Barry Stuart and Eva Marszewski. Barry Stuart's career spans over 5 decades. As a law professor at Canada's Osgoode Hall Law School in 1972, Barry was one of Canada's first environmental activists and litigators. He traveled to the Far East to author the Constitution of Papua New Guinea, which became law in 1975. Upon his return to Canada, he was appointed to the Territorial Court of the Yukon as Chief Justice. Barry Stuart is the first judge to ever use sentencing circles as part of his court process. While acting as Chief Judge, he took leave to negotiate a land claims agreement between Indigenous populations in Canada's north and the government. Barry has co-authored a groundbreaking book on peacemaking circles and continues to teach, consult internationally with governments and civil society, advise, and write. Eva Marszewski is an Ashoka Fellow, lawyer, facilitator, and teacher. She is the founder of Peacebuilders International Canada, a restorative justice charity focused on providing access to justice for adolescents.
Eva and I are going to try to make the incredible credible. We're going to tell you a couple of things that may seem incredible to you. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time trying to tell you how we got to thinking of these things as not incredible, but absolutely credible. And they are conflicts of valuable opportunity. Secondly, process is product. How you process something determines a whole bunch of things about outcomes. Thirdly, that, everybody in the world shares the same values.
It strikes me that one of the things that our society has relied way too heavily on is the criminal justice system. And the way in which a lot of issues that are being dealt with in the criminal justice system really needs to change. So, for example, in the work that we've done with young people over the last 15, 20 years, a lot of those youth really should have been dealt with outside of the criminal justice system. There was absolutely no reason why a 12, 14, 16-year-old should have been charged with offenses which really could have been dealt with, whether through a circle or through another justice vehicle. There's absolutely no need for criminal justice involvement in probably 99% of the cases we've worked with over the last 20 years.
People think that my whole purpose is to completely remove the courts. I think the courts have a great role to play. They have to be wise enough to make sure that they don't take on roles that they can't do, that the community can do a lot better. And I think that's happening. I mean, the reason that the court is now totally inaccessible to most people on the civil side and not capable of giving equal justice on the criminal side, it's doing too much. It's doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
Mandatory minimums, for example, mandatory provisions that take discretion away from members of the justice system, whether they be judges, prosecutors, or other officials, are actually not going to be helpful, because what you're calling for is a greater exercise of personal individual responsibility of participants in the justice systems to make decisions. Is this an appropriate case, for example, here or not? Should it be referred elsewhere? Should it be referred back to community? Why is it in this system? Why is it in this courthouse? As soon as you have mandatory minimums, you can't do that. The law specifies an outcome and it's been prejudged essentially. So aren't those some of the challenges that we're facing in some of the systems around the world?
Yeah, mandatory minimums are going to be the death knell of the court process. And they're going to be the death knell of the criminal justice system, because they're going to load up our jails in a way in which the jails are just simply going to become even more than they are now, just warehouses. we're not going to be able to have the resources to be able to deal with those problems that we take in. We have an opportunity when somebody is incarcerated to do something effective, but we won't have that opportunity if we don't minimize and reduce the reliance on jail. We're only going to be able to warehouse, and that's just going to make whatever problem we engage and take into jail, it's going to make it even worse. There needs to be a fundamental triage at the front door of the court to say, is there a better system to deal with this than the courts? Is that system a community-based system? Is that system a system that combines court and community? We need to do a triage. And the police officers and the judges and the probation officers and the correction officers have to be able to say at the front door what they're dealing with and inside their system, should we continue to be dealing with this? Should we be dealing with this at all? Should we be having a partnership with other organizations in the community and other organizations, period? We need to ask that question all the time. If we continue to do things we're ill-suited to do, we will be thrown out. You know, I mean, who can afford to go to a civil courtroom now to solve a problem? And conflicts are huge opportunities, but if they're not dealt with properly, the process is not proper. Conflicts are not dealt with properly, they become very destructive if they're just left alone. They fester. They don't solve themselves, they fester. So we need to figure out ways in which we can best deal with the conflicts. We need to turn conflict from something that people fear and run from to something that they embrace in a good way and take the constructive energy, turn that energy in conflict into something constructive.
You described two examples when you were at loggerheads with a system and you were trying to figure out, okay, this isn't really going anywhere. This isn't really working. As a judge, I've got a whole system and it's just not working the way it should. And then on the environment and the economy, people are loggerheads and they're fighting. And this isn't going to solve any problems if we don't actually start talking. So that's basically two of the key learning moments that you are able to describe.
Every turn in the road for me was one of those, this isn't working, it's got to be a better system. I mean, schools in the States, I mean, they were booting kids out for bullying, right? If you did any violence in the schoolyard, you were booted out of school. Well, by the time the school year was halfway through, they kicked out a quarter of the students and they were on the street committing crimes. You know, same in the Yukon. I mean, they had this no tolerance policy for violence. Terrific. You kicked a kid who's got a problem out of school. He's got no barriers or whatever. It just wasn't working. You know, picking up kids, putting them in care. I mean, that was a big moment for me to recognize that the court was not doing any good at all by apprehending and taking kids into care.
When you started, let's just focus on when you became a judge, because I've always heard you say that when you started, the jails were full.
And we were filling them. And God damn it, they built a new one. And I said, don't build a new one, because why not? Because we're not going to fill it.
All right. So we weren't getting anywhere filling them. What was the answer? What was the breakthrough? Because you did have a breakthrough. You changed the way you were doing things.
Yeah, well, I had to, basically, I went upstream to find out where all these people were coming into jail. You know, what the hell was going on? Somebody was kicking a lot of people into the river that led to jail. So the problem wasn't trying to get them out of the river. And upstream was, we were taking these kids into care, out of their family, out of their communities. And when they were in care, they were committing crimes because they had no families, nothing. And so they were angry kids, right? So basically, let's just, instead of standing downstream and just trying to pluck people out of the river. Let's go upriver and find out what the hell's, who's pushing all these people into the river. This is something that if somebody had asked me before I got frustrated and went looking for a better way to build a mousetrap, I would have said, not possible. There were so many people that I ran into who immediately started to say things like, yeah, there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. We have to figure out a better way. I don't know what that is, but let's talk about it. And so it just incrementally built. I had begun to realize that the power of people talking together around environmental issues was fundamental. And I'd seen in Papua New Guinea the traditional way in which they dealt with crime and how they prevented crime from happening, and watching how there was respect given as people talked, and those ideas kind of just circulate around. I would never want to say, or anybody say, oh, Barry started everything. No, everybody started everything. An awful lot of the work came from that whole consensus development process that we were doing. And it's those discussions that happened all over the world. South Africa, Bangladesh, Ukraine, all the way through the States, all the way across Canada. I mean, hundreds of people that encouraged the notion that we need to find a better way. There's a sea change happening. And I think it's a sea change that's going to fundamentally change the way we go about our business. We got enough of these politicians being delegated impossible tasks. We have enough of these experts giving impossible tasks. We really all need to step up. Then we all have something to contribute. And we need to create that safe place for those difficult conversations. That's the only way we're going to do this. When I first went to Papua New Guinea, the youth would follow elders everywhere they went. And they would brush on the ground where they're going to sit down. They'd bring them water. They'd bring them food. There was just this abiding respect.
Let me just interject. You were there because you were asked to write the Constitution for the country back in 72 or so.
Yeah, I went there as a part of the national planning team that they hired, because there was only a handful of graduates, Papua New Guinean graduates, and 25,000 Australian civil servants. And the new government didn't want, wanted to make sure what they sent out of their deliberations wasn't kind of thrown away by 25,000 civil servants that were not Papua New Guinean. And against my better judgment, went there, fell in love with the place, and might have still be there if I didn't want to be, a foreigner in that country. They had so much talent, so much absolute talent. I was there as a part of the National Planning Office, and as a lawyer, one of the things that I did was to negotiate self-government and to negotiate the Constitution. It was the best experience in my life.
And so I interrupted you because you started to talk about the young people and how they respected the elders when you first got there.
Yeah. So by 1984, 10 years into independence, lawlessness and crime was permeating the country, because the difference between those who were wealthy and those who weren't were so blatant. And so the Prime Minister of the day developed this Law and Order Committee, and we came up with a recommendation, unanimous recommendation, to the question of should the Papua New Guineans go to martial law or should they go back to traditional law? And we recommended clearly that they needed to go back to traditional law, because that was the way in which the disputes were going to be resolved, and give power back to the elders and power back to the traditional process as much as we possibly can, and have the justice system, the formal justice system they had in place, which was very Western, support what was going on. And the Constitution basically said, where there was a conflict between the Western law and traditional law prevailed. So it looked like that would happen. Well, the Prime Ministership changed, and the new Prime Minister decided to go with martial law, and martial law was imposed. and the whole country was clamped down under martial law. And as we predicted, when they could no longer afford to keep the troops on the street and martial law ended, the crime rate just exploded. And traditional law to this day has not been able to reassert itself in a way that made any sense. And you can see a lot of that happening in the First Nation countries. I mean, right now, as they go through land claims, some of the most difficult problems in First Nation communities are internal conflicts that have been there historically because colonialism wiped out their traditional processes for dealing with things. And only where some of those traditional processes have now reasserted themselves are these communities beginning to move in a different way. My biggest concern right now is that they get their own self-governments. If they replicate the same court structure, the same bureaucracy structure, the same political process, all of those things, they're going to assimilate themselves into the Western society. We need to give them the support to be able to re-engage their own traditional processes, or we're going to end up supporting their creation of exactly the same thing we're trying to get rid of. My hope is that in self-designing their new processes based on their traditional values, they will give us models of how to govern and how to do justice and how to do education in a way in which improves the failures that we're facing now in our governing processes and in our justice processes. And if we shut that down, I don't know who else is going to come along and basically demonstrate how to do those things.
Did you use circles and talking pieces in Papua New Guinea?
They had talking chairs that they'd carved. And they'd stand and they'd be sitting on the chair and they'd pull a chair out into the circle. And that meant they wanted to talk.
Oh, interesting. But they were sitting in a circle.
Sit in a circle because it's around the fire.
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like you sit in a circle. It's right. You end up sitting in a circle because you're around the fire.
Yeah. Which is why circles are ancient.
It's the way in which you can see it. There is no stage, right? There is no person that needs to be up front and important. So, like everything, you know, it's built on the backs of other people who've had really good ideas. I'm going to tell a story about one of the very first circles I did with the elders. And the elders are trying to get the youth to talk. They're not talking. And finally, one of the elders says to the youth, you know, we really love you. You're our future. We love you. And one of the kids looks up at them and says, no, you don't. You know, you talk behind our back. You drive. You don't pick us up on the road. You don't take us out in the bush anymore. You don't love us. And they have a 3-hour conversation about love. At the end of 3 hours, it's now almost midnight, and one of the elders says, well, I think that'll be enough. I think we're done today. I think we're done. Thank you for coming, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And the kids walk out, and one of the elders says, oh, no. We got to bring them back. We got to bring them back. Bring them back. We forgot to impose a sentence. And fortunately, Corbett and I both agreed, no, you did impose a sentence, a different kind of sentence. The sentence you imposed is you needed to love each other. And let's just see what happens. And what happened was, suddenly out of nowhere, the elders in the community started getting wood piled, meat dropped off their front, sidewalks shoveled, and secretly. And 4 of the 4 kids, none of them did any more serious offenses whatsoever. And in those days, in those communities, that was incredible. I told you the Jesse Scarf story, which has got to be one of my turning points in my own life, where she wouldn't go into the circle. Oh, no, I'm not going to go into the circle, Barry. All those people have got university degrees. I never got past grade 6. I'm not going into that circle. I'll look like a fool. No, you won't look like a fool, Jesse. You'll be fine. No, I'm not going in. Anyway, about halfway through the circle, I see she sneaks in, sits outside the circle, and I say, Jesse, if you're coming, you have to sit in the circle. Oh, okay. And she sits in the circle. At the end of the circle, we adjourn the circle to another day. And she comes over to me and she says, God, are those people at the University of Greece, are they ever stupid? You know, they know nothing about our traditions. They know nothing about our families. You know, I mean, what do they learn in that place? And she really began to see that she had a contribution to make. And it wasn't in that circle, but it was in another circle with Jessie, who was a very powerful elder. I mean, she was really quite a powerful elder. The Crown says in this case that we're dealing with a young man, a middle-aged guy who's got a long record, about 50 cases or something 50 offenses on the record. And the Crown makes a speech about how you can't possibly do this case in a circle. I mean, this person's just beyond the pale. There's no salvation for this person. He's just in and out of jail his whole life, and don't waste your time. This is the kind of person that the Crown Office and the justice system can take care of. And so we pass all the documents around the circle. So the criminal record gets passed around the circle. And I see that when the criminal record gets to Jessie, she holds on to the criminal record. And I'm going, oh my God, I forgot this guy probably was married to one of her daughters or something. You know, she's going to just lambaste and agree with the Crown. Sure enough, when the feather gets to her, she holds up the record and she says, I agree with the Crown. This is a record of failure. You know, this is terrible failure. Look at this. And she's flipping through the pages, says all that. And then she turns to the Crown and says, this is a record of your failure. 50 times you've had this person in your care and you haven't done a damn thing that's changed his life, you know, in 25 years. So what would be the problem giving us a chance to see if we can change his life? When the record got around to the Crown, he said, Jesse's right. You know, fine. Let's see you guys have a shot at it. By the way, not all stories in the circle have a Hollywood, Disneyland kind of finish, but that one did. I mean, he never committed another offense. There's a lot of ex-offenders in the circles, and they feel that their history has rendered them completely useless. Well, in the circle, they're very, very valuable because they're invaluable because they can say to some young kid, what happened to me is this, and that's what's going to happen to you. I'm speaking with authority because I've been there. I've been to jail. I know how you get there. I know how you keep getting there, and that's what's going to happen to you. And so they're able to talk with a lot of veracity about what is going to befall these people if they don't do something different. And that makes them feel as if they've made a contribution.
So in a courtroom, the judge has the power, makes the decisions, and the accused really is basically they're subject to the process.
I was told as a judge, don't get personally involved. You know, you got to stay objective. Yeah, if you want to be totally useless, just stay objective. Pretend, you know, this isn't bothering you. What I used to do in court, if I felt that it was affecting me, I'd call for an adjournment. And if somebody else was crying in court, I would say to them, well, let's take an adjournment so you can gather yourself together. And I wasn't trying to say, in the court, there's no crying done here. You know, there's no room for crying here. I was trying to help them get composed. Never did I realize I was telling them, no crying here. We can't be emotionally affected by what happens in court. It needs to be sterile.
In a consensus-based process or in a circle format, which is driven by consensus. How does the group deal with power differentials? So you as a judge sat in that first circle that I saw. What did you do to make people recognize that you were still there as part of the circle as compared to sitting up front in the courtroom and dais?
There are conflicts within circles. And so in the early days, when a conflict came up in the circle, somebody would say something racist or somebody would say something bad about somebody else in the circle. I would watch the feather speed up on its way to me. So people were seeing the conflict, recognizing that something had to be done about it, and passing the feather as quickly as they could. People were passing, not saying anything, just passing the feather, getting it to me to solve the problem. So what would you do if that was you as the keeper?
The key to solving these situations lies within the participants.
Right. Trust the circle. So there are different ways to trust the circle. What I used to do when they were looking for the judge to give an answer is I just pass. And there's always a gasp. Oh my God. He's not going to solve the problem for us. Oh my God. Right. We're all equal in the circle. Who's got an idea? Not the judge. It was a wonderful learning moment to let the circle realize it's their circle. It's not the judge's circle, so it's not the judge's responsibility to keep order in the house. Conflict is such an invaluable opportunity that we squander. It is the material that we can build relations and communities out of, whether it's in a factory or a family. It doesn't matter what it is. You build those kinds of connections by having the dialogues that are safe, by building respect and trust.
There are times when there is clearly someone who's causing an issue in the circle, and there are a lot of very polite people who are trying not to say anything and not to speak to it. And then finally, it gets to a breaking point when within the next round of the circle, everyone who has been quiet and said nothing finally speaks to what they have seen and noticed and observed. And there is a whole force going forward.
What circles are doing is reviving our ability to have a public dialogue. We're relearning how to speak into a circle in a way which is going to be conducive to positive exchanges. We're relearning how to listen in a way that respects people and makes people feel that they're being heard. All of those skills have atrophied over the last century. I mean, we just don't have the ability to meet in public in a good way. And most people don't even want to go to public meetings anymore because it's usually the lunatic fringe shouting at the other lunatic fringe. It's not really, there isn't a good discourse. There isn't a good exchange. And what you find, and I'm sure this is your experience as well, is the kind of dialogues that happen in circle are so constructive. They come up with ideas that nobody ever thought about before. Ideas that people are willing to support that they never thought they would support. You know, I don't think I've ever been to a circle where in the aftermath of the circle, people don't come up to me and say, I can't believe I said that. It just came out of me. You know, so many times that people get the talking piece, they say whatever they've prepared, and often you can't really prepare what you're going to say, but they say that, and they're about to pass it. They hesitate, and they hold it again, and out comes something that is totally unrehearsed. It's just really heart-speaking kind of things. And those are usually the comments that begin to connect people spiritually, because they begin to see people as human beings that reflect many of the same things that they do in their life. That, to me, is the incredible spirit of circles that comes, that people feel connected. In the old days, people helped each other. People looked after each other. Now, people put time into their community as their old age security. They created the notion that if anything goes wrong in the neighborhood, they're going to be there to help. Now people get a second job and they put money into the bank. They rely on money to deal with them when they're in difficulties. And that is changing the character of their relationships and communities. I really hope we can understand that it's more important that we participate in our communities than we have a second job. And it's more important to our mental health, to the mental health of our kids, to the safety of our community, to the capacity to be able to thrive by participating and finding ways to do that in our community. And my worry is we're just getting too lazy and too selfish and too apathetic and too cynical. And somehow we need to regain that ability that all those communities, small communities have, and some still have, that notion that we're all part of a larger family. Circles to me are a way of enhancing the participatory nature of our democracy. Our democracy depends on people being responsible. It depends not on simply giving the responsibility off to professionals. It really depends upon every person stepping up and informing themselves of what's going on and acting responsibly. That's what democracy requires. All other systems, you can rely completely on professionalism. You can't do that in democracy. People have to participate, and circles help that to happen. So learn how to do that. We began to have the community step up and be the village that is required to raise a child, to equally share responsibilities. If the mother was simply not able to handle her alcohol or drug problem, and there were no other family members willing to step up, people found ways to step up. People found ways to help mothers be able to deal with those kinds of problems. And where there were no resources from government that could have made a difference, there were resources out of the community that came out and made a difference. And I was never smart enough to think that the circles were a way to build participatory democracy. The circles were a way to engage people. And most people really want to be engaged in their community and to be able to do something.
Given this initial breakthrough, what were some of the values that you identified as key components of this approach?
The power of voluntary, power of consensus, the power of respect, inclusivity, all of those things. I mean, they're all fundamentally the same. That's the iron, and that's the merger of the universal principles that we all have got and the universal principles of processes that work. They're designed in accord with the fundamental principles of interaction. That's the important kind of landing strip that gets First Nations engaged in this, is they were much more driven by respect for land, respect for the environment, respect for each other, respect for elders, the kind of values that permeate peacemaking circles really are from First Nations. That's the First Nation contribution. It led to that amazing moment for me, recognizing, holy shit, all these traditional values that are coming out, respect, trust, love, all that kind of stuff, not one of them is a design principle about the way we run our courts. Not one of them. The things that we all share about how we want to drive our interactions with each other, not one of them is prominently driven into the design process of our courts. Not love, not trust, not respect, not empathy. I mean, some of them linger on the sidelines, but they're not fundamental core principles in which we design our system. They're just not. And that's funny, isn't it? But the way in which we run our meetings, the way we run our conflict situations, the way we run our legislature, right, we do all of those kinds of things. They're not one of them really fundamentally structured around the principles that we say we want to reflect from ourselves when we get into difficult situations with people.
If you're charged with a criminal offense and you've been given the opportunity to participate in a circle, how voluntary is it when you're actually facing charges?
They have a choice. Their choice is between going to a criminal process and having a judge decide what's going to happen to you, or going to a community and having the community participate in the choice. I mean, nobody has totally uninhibited choices, okay? And nor should they have. I mean, we all make a social contract with each other that we're all going to drive on the right side of the road. I mean, you have to eat. You don't have a voluntary. There's certain things that are not voluntary. You have to eat. You might get a choice of what you're going to eat, but you have to eat. You have to get along to survive. You can't. So, yeah. Would I like it to be different? I don't think so. I mean, we really have to come down to make some choices in life. And what I think we're trying to do is create a choice that gives you a much more expression of who you are, gives you an opportunity for you to earn back the respect you might have lost in committing a crime. It gives you a chance to show the community and for the community to show you. Gives the community an opportunity to say, you did a bad thing, but you're not a bad person. Now, basically, we say you did a bad thing, you're a bad person, and we're going to do something bad to you. It's a fundamental difference. The community makes a choice. Everybody makes a choice in this. Is this somebody we want to save? Is this somebody we want back in the community? Well, we say that in the criminal justice system. Do the time, do the crime, do the time. But do the time and you're not forgiven and you're still dealt with as an outcast. So it's really, it takes a while to settle yourself into and dig yourself into the differences, because the differences are very subtle in many respects and quite bold and stark in other respects.
Why is it that participating in circles engenders a sense of safety and trust in people? What is it about that process that allows people to feel safe enough to trust their genuine emotions and feelings to the group?
What makes spiritual connections happen in a circle? Why do people feel spiritually connected to other people such a strong way in a circle that they can identify there, but for the power of grace of God go I? I mean, what is it? I think there's an innate desire for people to connect to others in a good way. I mean, what is this value that we all have? Why do we all have the same values? These people come from different families, different religions, different economic classes, different cultures, but they all have this. I mean, for me, it's almost got to be biological, that this is the way we want to be as human beings. And we've created institutions and processes that undermine that instinct that we have about the way we want to connect to our environment and the way we want to connect to the world we live in.
Is it a response to a sense that someone has expressed something authentically and honestly, that it's really coming from the heart, as they say, speak from the heart? Is that one of the reasons that people feel that they can stand on more solid ground and respond to honesty and authenticity?
I think it is. I think there's a natural inclination for people to admire courage, for people to admire honesty, and to recognize it for what it is. It's somebody basically trying to reach out in a good way to the larger environment in which they live in. You go into communities and do circle training, and it's amazing how many people just say, this relates to me naturally. I feel naturally inclined to these ideas and doing this. Every time I go in a circle, my faith in humanity is enhanced. Yes, there are some circles that don't work, and it's not a silver bullet for everything. I mean, I think that's why this self-design principle is so important. You have to ask the question, can you design something that fits or not? Maybe there isn't. There's always going to be a need for a court. There's always going to be a need for other processes. But I think this is a fundamentally huge opportunity for us to do something different that's going to change the way in which our culture functions. If we don't allow experimentation to happen within certain limits, you're gonna scowl at me, but let scowl away. I think one of the hopes that I have for changing the way the justice system is going to work in 2030, corporations. I think the smarter corporations are beginning to recognize clearly they got to create a village of committed people if they're going to succeed. Things are changing so quickly now. Money isn't going to keep the fastest gun, the brightest person working for them. What's going to keep that person is that they feel a sense of commitment, a sense of connection, and they feel that they're doing something for a corporation that is doing things honestly and is making contributions. They need to create connection and relationships where people who are really bright feel that they're going to work at a place that cares. And I think they're going to learn how, and it's been my experience in the work I've done with corporations, that's what happens when they begin to look inwardly to make sure that there's a community of respect, of mutual caring, of trust. People will stay. Turnovers drop down. The kind of grievances that happen on the floor of the plant or in the offices of they change, and people want to be there. I think corporations are going to invent and develop better ways to make connections than probably any other institution.
And that's definitely an extremely hopeful sign, because so many corporations are now involved in internal culture change, in
right,
equity, awareness, and so on. But at the same time, we also know that, and this goes back to your roots of your interests, environment and natural resources. At the same time, we know that huge corporations, global corporations, are exploiting in unsustainable ways their few remaining resources that are left on the planet. So while they provide some of our best hope for moving forward in cultures, in communities, and developing connection, how do we wrestle the inappropriate behaviors and their aggressive behaviors in terms of the environment? Don't we still need the courts there?
Yeah, but the courts aren't going to make the difference that is needed. Peer pressure. I look to other corporate leaders to say, you need to step up your game. You know better than anybody. You know who the bad apples are. You know who are cutting corners. You know who are doing things, and you know how that happens. You need to step up. We can't afford, and never will be able to afford, the kind of regulatory process that's going to be effective enough against these billionaires. We're just not going to be able to have enough police, enough prosecutors who have the time and the experience to be able to keep pace with what's going on that's contrary to the general interest and the general best interests of our society without having peer pressure within those corporations. They need to step up. You know, I mean, you can't turn your back on what you know is wrong. And that's what changes what happens in schoolyards. It's what changes what happens in the political process. And what's happening is people are just not having the courage to step up and say what needs to happen.
What do we see as the possibilities for justice in 2030? What do we see as a direction into the future that can really make a difference in our justice systems and justice institutions, if we're going to have strong institutions in order to promote some level of peace in our world?
It's happening. I think there are police chiefs, judges, prosecutors, everybody up and down the justice system beginning to recognize more of them isn't going to make the problems go away. We need to share power. We need to share respect. We need to find ways in which we can meaningfully engage each other. We can't have this is my responsibility. This is my power. I'm doing this. Move over, go and find yourself something to do. No, we really need to recognize that institutional responses are always going to need community-based responses to be right alongside them, working in tandem with what they're doing. We cannot do this alone. Like I'm doing this stuff now in the military, right? The generals tried to order no more sexual misconduct. You can't order cultural change. People have to be a part of that cultural change. And the Canadian military, I think, is doing something that's quite amazing. I mean, we're doing this as a result of this lawsuit. They're doing restorative engagements, basically small cohorts at a time, giving people an opportunity in the military in a cohort of 15 people to begin to talk to each other about what kind of an environment do they want to create in their military. That's the way to make deep, sustainable change. And that's what circles do.
So how can we have more people globally understand that this is the opportunity and presents the possibility when we're looking at more and more countries turning into fascist systems?
Yep, no more important time than right now. When, now, who, you. I mean, basically that's what people have to see, that it's time. And not much time left for us to basically turn it around. There has to be a sense of civic responsibility once again. There has to be social capital, has to be fundamentally increased. There are lots of things that scare the hell out of me, but there's some things that really encourage me to think that we're moving towards a sea change in the way in which we care for each other and the way in which we care for this planet. And the desire to do so is fundamentally and profoundly evident in the way in which circles happen. I mean, you create that safe place for these difficult discussions, and people are willing to enter into a difficult discussion. You have to believe that the values that people have, as deep down as and as covered and as repressed as they might be, they are, if they're nurtured, going to bloom. You have to believe that. Otherwise, what are you doing? I mean, look how far you've gone with that belief. And look at it. And yeah, you're not going to get everybody initially. There are going to be people for different reasons you haven't thought about who might want to just step aside. You need to find out what those reasons are, find out where they are, and try to find a way to connect to them. People want to be connected. The most important thing about circles is building relationships. That's the most important thing that we can do. In any time in court that the court was able not to separate people from connecting to other things, but connecting, we did it a lot better. You know, I always wanted to do a study of how many connections that we had as a result of a sentencing or an intervention, and therefore what the recidivist rate might have been. I fundamentally believe that the more you can connect people to family, community, the land, whatever they're connected to, is going to ensure that the recidivist rate is going to be next to nothing. That's the hope, that people basically understand what the Aboriginal people understand. It's the connection to land and to their responsibility that really makes for their lives. It's the connection to their community. It's the connection to their traditions. It's the connection to their culture. It's those connections that are fundamentally shaping the very best of us and the very best of our communities and making the very best for our families. That's my hope. And all my stories about those connections convince me more every time I do a circle and see those connections arise, how important that is.